It's my privilege and honor to be welcoming Andrew Samuels for this hour with the title Psychotherapy and Politics, Cutting Edge Transformation or Narcissistic Wish. It's a really great title. I want to say just a few things about you, Andrew, by way of introductions. You're a past chair of UKCP 2009 to 2012. You also co-founded the Psychotherapists and Counsellors for Social Responsibility in 1995, also the Psychotherapy and Counselling Union, which has just been an incredibly important resource for so many colleagues. Was one of the leaders of the campaign in the 90s to end discrimination in psychoanalytic and other therapeutic trainings, discriminating against gay men and lesbian women. Known inside and outside in the Jungian world for critiques of Jung's racism and anti-Semitic stance. Lots of books and papers on politics, including the political psyche, so prolific contribution to the field there. And you've also been a consultant to politicians, including New Labour and the Obama presidential election campaigns, and also to activist groups. So you have a long experience in this field, Andrew, and just thank you for coming along to the seminar series to be with us for this next hour and present to us. So Andrew, over to you to get started.
Thanks, John. A little bit of housekeeping of my own. Firstly, I've got laryngitis, which is why my voice sounds so interesting. Next, I have put on the chat my email address. I'm open to any kind of communication or correspondence for 2 weeks from today. So please feel free to avail yourselves of that. Thank you for coming. John tells me that in fact 540 people or something like this have signed. That's absolutely amazing. It makes me very nervous because it's a risky paper, as you're going to hear. Let's deal with some background. I am a born troublemaker. That means I cause trouble without meaning to, and sometimes I cause trouble while definitely meaning to. My family would tell you I'm the wicked son, I'm the rebel. But there's a snag. I am an outsider, but I'm also an insider and very much want to be an insider. And I probably will die before I resolve the tension between being an insider and being an outsider. I've had a long professional history of working the field between therapy and politics. John listed the organization and the publications. And by the way, I should add the journal, Psychotherapy and Politics International. I was the first consultant editor of that. So I have a professional history. I think what I'm trying to say is I have a reason to be here talking about this. Does the political turn in psychotherapy and counseling do anything other than make we therapists feel good about ourselves? That's what I'm asking. So I'm a Jungian analyst, and here's the synchronicity. Yesterday, while sitting on the toilet, which is the right place to read such things, I read the New Psychotherapist, which is the professional magazine of UKCP. They did a survey. I'm not going to go into the details except to say 2/3 of quite a high level of respondents said they wanted to read more about psychotherapy in society, psychotherapy's role in society. And that is what I have been trying to discover and work out. And this talk shows you that I'm still an enthusiast for what I call therapy thinking in politics, but now I'm much, much more skeptical. I hope my enthusiasm comes over, but even more, I hope, given the nature of this series of seminars, I hope my skepticism comes over and is useful. This is not a recantation. It is a late career reflection. I'm 75, and that's what you should do. The background to all of it, everything that we're going to be talking about, is the failure in the West of progressive politics. It's often been said that people on the left may not be good losers, but they sure as hell are experienced losers. So that is a very important background. Everything that we're doing is going to be, has to be looked at through the lens of failure when compared with the success of mainstream media and a kind of neoliberal generality in political thinking. But there's something else that we need to talk about. It's fine for therapists to be interested in politics and to get involved in politics and to develop theories about politics, but there is a risk of opportunism, taking advantage of a shift in the professional zeitgeist to have a successful conference or series of seminars. And make no mistake, my friends, I have taken advantage of that shift in the zeitgeist time and time again. I'm opportunistic, it's my shadow. It doesn't mean that what we do when we link therapy and politics should be thrown away, but it definitely is something that needs to be seen through. For sure, there has been a political turn in the therapies, particularly, I think, in understanding the role of social, cultural, and political factors in the formation of both the therapist and their client. That has certainly happened. But alongside it, I'm sorry to say, there is still a lot of evasion about what this political turn, about what therapy thinking in politics might mean. Every year, I update the survey I did in the Political Psyche, which was published in 1993. I asked therapists from different schools all over the world, what do you do when your client or patient brings into the clinical situation cultural, social, and above all, political material? It's interesting that even now, honest respondents to that question say, I don't know what to do. It's not covered in the training. Now, it's starting to be covered in the training, but I think in general terms, it's not much. And you get a lot of evasive replies to the survey. For example, my favorite, every interpretation I give, said a famous Kleinian psychoanalyst, every interpretation I give is a political act. Bullshit. Of course it isn't. And then people say, well, the therapies are political in their origins, in their histories. They have radical roots. Well, there are little bits. But overall, if you look at the history overall, the therapies have been anything other than radical. In fact, I would say they have been, for the most part, anti-radical. So the political turn needs to be matched by a kind of evasion of that political turn. As I hope you are hearing, what I'm trying to do is save my baby, actually. Because if it becomes fashionable, if it becomes something to exploit, something to build a business on, then there's a real problem. And I have to say, I'm not immune to building a business, but I'd like to think that I have it in some kind of proportion. So after that background, and I want to stress, this journey for me has been highly personal, because taking on, for example, the aristocracy of the Jungian world in relation to Jung's anti-Semitism and racism really was a kind of character building exercise. Being slandered in the newspapers when I was one of the two leaders, along with Joanna Ryan, of the campaign to stop the discrimination against lesbians and gay men. That was also pretty difficult to get through. The president of the British Psychoanalytical Society told The Guardian that I was a notorious bisexual and had been rejected several times for training at the Institute of Psychoanalysis. Now I'll move on. What is politics? What is politics? And when you go through the different kinds of things that we mean by politics, you can start to ask yourself, how have we done in these areas, we being the therapists? Now, of course, if I say the therapist, that's an appalling generalization. There isn't a Leviathan, a monolith of therapists, but for the sake of having any kind of discussion this evening or any other time, we have to say that there is something called the therapists. So I'm going to be going through different approaches to politics and asking, did we do well or badly or made no impact at all? Now, in terms of radical politics, as I like everything to do with the climate crisis or trans issues or war, violence, and peace, I would say therapists have made some kind of a contribution. I think the pity with the climate crisis is that it's a governmental level business as well as a street level business. And by the way, I'm very pro street level work. I'm one of the therapy advisors to Extinction Rebellion. And I think we have had some kind of an influence. As regard trans, if you're a trans person, then obviously you have a lot of enemies in the therapy world, but you have a lot of enemies in the world anyway. And increasingly, you will have allies and supporters in the therapy world. If you're talking about peace and violence and war, I think there's some quite interesting discussions about whether war is archetypal, ineluctable, unchangeable, built-in, can't be managed. And there are people like me and others who have written about political violence, not only to condemn it as something done by terrorists, in big quotes, who are different from us, difference in color, difference in culture, different in religion, but that political violence is, as Hannah Arendt said, very rational sometimes. So I think when it comes to that kind of radical politics, oh, and I would add, everything still to do with socialism, which is a word that we cannot stop using, as is the word left or left wing. We need these words. I think therapists have not said so much about that, because for me, socialism has always been and probably will always be about economic and social justice. And I don't think we've been awfully influential in that particular sector of radical politics. The next kind of politics to think about is the politics of private life, which are really very interesting because given neoliberal domination, given the way the media is controlled by quite narrow sectoral interests, challenges to the status quo often come from the personal, private, even intimate and relationship area. Non-possessive relating, which was a term we used back in the 60s and 70s, is a kind of social justice philosophy lived out in the relationship area. And feminism and non-sexist men's behaviors are also places where intimacy and the public conversation are creatively mixed up. I'm not sure that therapists have pulled their weight here as successfully as they could, because we know about the politics of private life, but I still see clinical papers, and not only by psychoanalysts, that hail the triumph of the work as illustrated by the fact that the client got pregnant. There is a kind of innate, do I mean innate? Well, inane conservatism that still penetrates quite a lot of therapy thinking about relationships, but also there's a huge area where this is not, in fact, the case. So I think the politics of private life, we have made somewhat of a contribution, and I think this could be something that gets developed and has further evolutions as time goes on. So I've talked about radical politics, I've talked about the politics of private life, and now the third one is professional politics. Oh, they are awful, absolutely awful. And actually, one of the reasons why it's so hard to be anything other than deeply, deeply skeptical about the value of therapy thinking when it comes to politics is how we are when we do it ourselves. We are in a mess around sexuality. We are in a mess around race. We have not got a handle on economic issues that prevent people from training or from accessing depth relational therapy. Huge arguments about should we have scholarships? Should we have bursaries? This is something we simply have not really made that much progress. And then we come to SCOPED, to StatReg, statutory regulation. These attempts to industrialize, schematize, control therapy work are still very popular because people think they will make us respectable. They're wrong, actually. I mean, I don't mind not being that respectable, but it's just not going to work. Therapy is a dangerous, almost always countercultural activity, at least at moments. So you're not going to be able to use things like statutory regulation to control people's responses to therapy. I mean, the reason I went into the election to be UKCP chair in 2009 was at that time only to stop StatReg. Then I got interested, I got into power, and it was fun a lot of the time, and we managed to do some quite interesting things. But essentially, for me, statutory regulation symbolizes all that is wrong with society's attitude to therapy and with the therapy profession's delusions about what to do about itself. And by the way, the linkage of therapy of various kinds with benefits, especially benefits that are being given to people with disabilities, is quite wrong. And if anybody knows of someone who is working in a job center or for a job center with the task of getting people to come to meetings, to go to appointments, to get the right attitude towards work, tell them they are absolutely and totally unethical. So radical politics, politics of private life, professional politics, and mainstream politics. Okay, this is shameful. I worked for Tony Blair. I believed in it. I believed in the third way. I'm not going to go into the details. When it all went wrong, I felt it very deeply, but I also learned, I think there's something in the Bible, it's a proverb, put not thy faith in princes. And I should have known that. The work I did for Obama or for his electoral team, I don't feel ashamed of. It was very important when a black man was seeking to be the father of the nation. And by the way, this phrase, the father of the nation, Americans think was Abraham Lincoln, but it wasn't. It was Cicero in ancient Rome. Anyway, how can a black man be the father of such a nation? Well, they turned to somebody who had written a lot about progressive and contemporary approaches to fathering that did not equate the father either with separating the baby from the mother or with spirituality or with discipline, but gave him an earthy, body-based role. That's how they discovered me, actually. And I don't feel at all embarrassed that I dealt with that. And in the second Obama election campaign, the whole question of how a black man could be aggressive also came up. I didn't have so much to say about that, except to say it's the right question. Lastly, politics in the session. How do you discuss politics in the session? Well, I haven't got time to tell you, and I'm not sure I really know, but it's coming up all the time. Gaza and other issues before it, Brexit, irradiate many, many sessions, not all. It's very interesting to see which clients and patients don't want to talk about that kind of thing, and to respect and honor them, actually, if that's where they are in their thinking about it all. But the big problem with politics in the session is not about doing it or not doing it. We're going to do it. We're going to talk politics with clients if clients want to talk politics with us. The idea of the abstinent neutral therapist has long, long ago been junked. And if you can talk about sexuality, spirituality, aggression, relationships, you can talk about politics. Why is politics more dangerous? Why is the therapist talking politics with their client more likely to influence the client than the therapist talking spirituality and religion? But the big issue, the big problem is disagreement. How do you work with people who disagree with you and you with them? I haven't got time. I wrote a paper about it. It's very, very difficult to do. It's a real skill. But I'll give you just the headline. We all work with people who we don't like. We all work with people whose behaviors we don't approve of, despite our adherence to being non-judgmental. We always work with people who have deep, dark, shadowy, ulterior motives for what they say and do. Why is politics different? It isn't. It's a taboo, a shibboleth that goes right back to the beginning of psychoanalysis and the other psychotherapies. And that's why it's so facile and actually stupid to say, oh, therapy's always been radical. It hasn't. One last aspect of politics to talk about is the question of humanitarian and welfare work. Crisis intervention, trauma work. Now here, I'm very confused. I haven't done it. I've been asked, but I've kept my role to be organizational. When, for example, therapists were finding themselves under pressure when COVID began, I set up some schemes to provide help, but I didn't really do any. And the reason I didn't is because this is where I am a hopelessly intellectual person. I think humanitarian interventions are deeply problematic. We can't live without them. I'm not stupid in that way. You need them. We need them in Gaza right now, if the politicians would understand it. But basically, there's a really risky aspect to crisis intervention work. It can make things a lot worse. And I think the facile use of trauma and ideas around trauma as a way of getting therapists involved in all kinds of wonderful sounding and possibly even truly wonderful humanitarian and welfare projects, I think we need to think about it. So that's the end of the second section of this talk. The first section was the background and me, really. The second section was what is politics? And I said there were 5 sorts and the problem of humanitarian and welfare work. Now I think we come to the heart of this. And it's 7:30. I'm going to talk for another 15 minutes, I hope. This is a huge problem. It's the problem of being right. We're always right. It's very hard to be wrong when you're using psychology in relation to politics. The worst thing someone can say is, oh, well, I've read that somewhere else, or heard it all before. Behind the problem of being right is the real problem, which is wanting always to be right. And that means for so many therapists, wanting our theories to be right. Get into the depressive position and the political situation will change. Let's think about the transcendent function in which the warring opposites find a common ground and produce a unifying third. Genitality. Genitality will solve the problems of Ukraine. Look, I'm obviously going over the top, but I think you will understand what I'm getting at. Just as wanting to be right spoils many therapies, Bob Morley's book on the analysand's tale shows that the vast majority of clinical breakdowns come as a result of a theoretical argument, and the analyst or therapist won't let go. So we need to think about how not to want to be right. Now that's fucking difficult, but it does mean being pluralist. I wrote a book in 1989 called The Plural Psyche, in which I said pluralism means looking at different points of view in parallel, not trying for a conversation in which everything is resolved in an agreement. So one way of thinking about not being right is to assume at the beginning that everyone is. As I say, it's very hard to be completely wrong. But the main thing I want to do in this very short high-octane talk is to say, do not put too much weight on proving the utility, the beauty of your precious theoretical views. That's the narcissism that is in the title of this evening's seminar. And I do it too. I want to be right. I have pet theories, good enough leaders, good enough citizens, all of that kind of thing. Yes, I want people to quote me. I want people to use these ideas, but it brings huge risks. There is a problem about wanting to be right. That was the third section. The fourth section is very punchy. You can't do this on your own, and you being either the therapist or an individual therapist. You can't do this on your own. It is an arrogant inflation to think that therapy and therapists will change politics alone. What's needed are broad front federations, connections with other groups. The problem is only a few of them want us. They don't want us because they think we're mad. They don't want us because our professional politics are so awful. But there are groups, especially in the climate crisis area, which are welcoming of therapists as participants, equal participants. Imagine a spectrum with a statistician at one end and a psychotherapist at the other end. That's the kind of thing. We tried it in PCSR. It was so difficult. We didn't really manage it. I think we not only have to find different kinds of groups, we have to find groups with quite different epistemologies, quite different ways of thinking and deploying knowledge. I don't think we've really made a very good start. The next thing I want to say, this is the fifth section, get out of the safe areas. Get out of the safe areas. Now, what I mean is, well, first of all, I mean, therapy isn't safe. I've gone on stages many times and read extracts from people's websites, the mission statements of the websites that portray therapy as, especially with the person whose website it is, as a safe process. It isn't. The safety and the rules around safety are more for us, the therapist, than for the patients. Lots of people say that. But I want to get outside the safe areas when it comes to the connecting of therapy thinking with politics. And that means basically forgetting psychology, if possible. So economics is a very good place to start. What is so wrong with economic equality and social justice? What is so right about inherited wealth? I mean, I've been worrying about these things for a very, very long time. And I do think that economics, money are areas where an input of therapy thinking would be very useful and very welcome at this point in time. I've been fascinated by Ingrid Robins, the Dutch economist, who has developed the idea of limitarianism. How rich can we allow people to be? What is a societally accepted and supported spread of wealth? This is really important because, a bit more jargon coming in here, we are living in an age in Western societies of assortative mating. Assortative mating, well, I could go on about it in academic terms, but what it basically means is rich people marry rich people. And this has increased enormously. The old days in which some impoverished English aristocrat married a really rich but totally common and crude American millionaire, billionaire, that's changed. The millionaires and the billionaires fuck each other and they marry each other, and we need to talk about it. I'm hoping to get an organization to do a big conference, not just on money, which is quite easy, but on economic inequality, and to do it with the IFS, to do it with PPR, I've forgotten the full name of that. But there are organizations that I think are run by people who have some personal experience of therapy for sure, who might be interested in that. All of this, of course, affects us, who gets therapy, who does therapy. And there are a couple of other interesting things that I don't have time to talk about. And one is the role of male therapists, because I think that has a lot of bearing on economics and money, and particularly the situation of male therapists of color. These things are, of course, being explored by many people in Barton, but I hope the mainstream, as it were, well, Barton is mainstream. I hope all of us get involved with it. I'm going to cut quite a lot out. The next section is on activism. I was invited recently to talk at a conference of the International Association of Analytical Psychology on what are our values. And my talk is called, Is Activism a Value? One of the things that comes up a lot is that people say, well, I'm an activist citizen, but I'm not sure I am or want to be an activist therapist. Well, I respect people's doubts in this. I don't have them, though. Recently I wrote a paper called The Activist Client. Those person-centered folk here, and I know there are lots, will know Art Bohart's work on the active client. And I took it. It's very unusual for an analyst to take a person-centered therapist's work and build on it. It's usually not like that, as you know. But the activist client is something I think we need to think about. Here are a few ideas about this. When you meet a new client, take a political history. I mean, don't be heavy about it. Don't say, now I'm going to take your political history. But allow your side of the conversation in the early meetings to explore people's political development. I do workshops with NHS senior managers in which I ask them, what was your first political memory? And forbid anyone to talk about two things. First, nothing over the age of 10, and secondly, school milk. This is necessary, otherwise everyone talks about school milk. It's fantastic what comes up. So I think there is a question of pursuing, not compulsively, the inner politician, the inner activist, something like that in the client, and asking, well, why didn't you? Is there something that holds you back? Is there something that we could talk about that, if you were able to engage with it, might lead to you taking activist steps? Got to be careful, because there is always a risk of foisting things on clients, but I think it's very important. Last thought about activism. Whose activism? You see, in the section I've left out, I was raising some doubts about the decolonialization movement. Of course, overall, I'm in favor, and I'm learning from it, and I'm learning what I need to unlearn. And I'm proud to be an ally. But at the same time, I think activism from within one's own world is a very different story than activism on behalf of another person. I'm sure people will come back to me on that. So let's end with the problem, the big problem. The problem is that we are too deep, we are too reflective, we're not activist, short-term, and superficial enough. We submerge instinctive reactions to the visible signs of suffering under vast umbrellas of theorization and calls for complexity to be understood and for all sides to be listened to. I've just done a huge, great thing on a Jungian politics list, and I've seen that a couple of people from that list are here. What's wrong with being one-sided? Being one-sided is perhaps the only sensible political, psychological standpoint. Thinking is very dangerous, and the valorization of being over doing, following Winnicott, who's very problematic in this area, the valorization, the privileging of being over doing is actually a problem. So don't think too much. Be superficial. It's not necessary to prove your integrity by having ever more deep and complicated ideas about the political world. Before getting to a final point, a spiritual point, I'll just read a little quote from Hamlet. It's from To Be or Not to Be, of course. It's on this question of not enough action and too much reflection. Thus, conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. And this is the final thought. It's about spirituality. Charles Péguy, the French writer on religion, said, everything starts in mysticism and ends in politics. And I think this is really very, very important. If you can find the spiritual thread as you work your way to discovering how your therapy thinking will intersect with the world in which you live and you can see other people's suffering, try to see this as a fundamentally spiritual project. I will end with an undercutting of my whole talk in one line. If all else fails, lower your expectations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. What a wonderful way to finish. I really appreciate that. So important in terms of managing in this world. And yeah, thank you. There's a lot to think about, a lot to take away. We've got just a little under 15 minutes left of our hour together, and we've got some time for comments, for questions. I can already see some hands going up there, which is great. Just in the format of tonight, before we go to the Q&A, I did forget to mention in my introductions that as part of the seminar series, we have some community time after the hour. So we're going to pause for a 5-minute break on the hour. And if that is your time with us done for this evening, then you're very welcome to take your leave. And I know, Andrew, you will be doing that too. So we'll hold that 5-minute break so we can kind of do what we might have a screen break, or you might leave us for the evening, and we'll have 25 minutes of some community time, to finish off our evening together. So just catching that kind of structural point of the evening. So, Andrew, are you feeling ready to take some kind of interaction on the camera? We could open up some microphones for questions and comments.
I'll follow your lead on this. There are 99 plus contributions on the chat. I am not even going to open it. So you're going to have to do all that. But let's keep this going quickly. Yeah.
Let's go. Okay, thank you. Janet, let's see if we can come to you first of all. Let's open up your microphone and hear from you, Janet.
Thank you, Andrew. Food for thought. My mind is buzzing. You said right at the beginning that you described yourself as an outsider wanting to be an insider. I'm wondering if you could comment on the role of a bystander.
Well, I would comment, I think, on the role of the opposite, which is the role of the witness, because I think that's really a place where, I mean, I knew Patricia Clarkson very well, and I talked with her about bystanding, but I'm more interested in witnessing and action. So that would be my hope to see happen. But I will say one thing: the profession of therapy is very cruel. A lot of people get beaten up, and a lot of people just stand and watch. So I just wanted to say that, and in particular, younger therapists get shat on by the great figures that they've been looking up to all the time. Okay, and if I do it, I'm sorry, but I think it's very important. That's my best bet. Can I know you've got lots to say, but I would like to keep this thing moving fast.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Let's come to Peter next. Open your mic, Peter.
Oh, hi.
Oh, we've just lost your mic. Let's get your mic open again.
Unmute, Peter.
There we go. Hey, Andrew, good to see you. Thank you. It's good to see what you're thinking again. Arthur Coleman talks about the need to form conscious groups as the next thing we do for our survival, sort of focusing our individuation attention toward groups. And I think you do that in your political clinics. And I'm just curious, any thoughts you have about that now?
I'm all for it. Be careful, be wary, lest it be promoted as the solution. You see, this is the difficulty. If I was the inventor of the idea of conscious groups, I'd be talking about conscious groups day and night because I want to sell it. Now, there's nothing wrong with people in a profession like ours like you and me, having ideas that we really want to see come to fruition. Nothing wrong. But there is this shadow problem, which is that we really want to put them at the center of everything. Now, I know your work, and you are never going to say the solution is anything, because you're not a solution person. But we need to keep saying there aren't solutions. For God's sake, if there were solutions, the world might have found them. And indeed, in all my work on good enough, which is the thing I'm always trying to sell, I put central failure. Failure is the most important thing. The art of failure, the management of failure, failing better, as Beckett put it, all this is terribly important. Am I against conscious groupings? Of course not. Of course not. But I'm not against very much, you see. And
Do you know what Winston Churchill said about defining success? Your countrymen define success as going from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm.
Yes. T.S. Eliot, every attempt is a wholly new start and a different kind of failure. Thank you. So nice to see you. So nice to see you coming all the way from California. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, lovely. Let's come next to Helena, please. We open up your microphone.
Oh.
We should be hearing you now. Yes, I think that's
hello.
you. Yeah, lovely.
Hello, Andrew. I was a bit uncertain. I didn't understand what you said about decolonizing, about the decolonizing movement. Am I unmuted? Yeah. And I was wondering what you felt about that more generally, and what you feel about whiteness studies and the work of white therapists acknowledging their white privilege and acknowledging their colonial past.
Yes, that makes sense to me. But I'm one of the people who's very influenced by a lot of academic work about the unintended role of decolonization in shoring up the status quo. That's the difficulty. Because you can clean the surface, but you don't clean what lies behind it. But you're absolutely right. And I started PCSR, Psychotherapists and Counselors for Social Responsibility, with Judy Ride, who's absolutely one of the best people in this area. So I think, I know what you're saying. I'm stumbling with this. In other words, I'm already in a kind of post-decolonizing set of thinking, because I think there are some problems with it. But as I said in my talk, it's best, in my view, I may be wrong, but it's just my view, maybe it's a silly old man's point of view, that people affected by problems are the best people to deal with them, and that the concept of allyship has some difficulties with it.
What do you mean by the people affected by problems being the best to? Do you mean people of colour, that only people of colour should be active?
People of sexual difference, people with specific viewpoints that are not wanted not wanted. It's better, in my view, that the decolonizing moves come from people directly affected. Listen, this talk is about the rise in skepticism. It involves a great deal of self-criticism here. I have been a leader of so many movements to end oppression in areas where I'm not oppressed at all. Okay? The first one in my career was being asked to front the anti-discrimination campaign with regard to lesbians and gay men, as that was the language then, in respect of training. Recently, I got an invitation to speak at a big conference on gender fluidity because I'd written so much about it. I said, no way, no way. 25 years ago, maybe. But now,
but with people of colour, surely it's different, because if people, if it's white people who are oppressing people of colour, why should it be people of colour that have to lead that movement. It's time for white people to stand up, surely, and take responsibility.
Yes,
It's quite different with colonialism.
I agree with that too. I
Yeah.
do. But I think, if you'll allow me to be autobiographical, I have come to see that standing up for other people in a kind of organized, structured way has problems with it that I didn't realize when I did so much of it. We need to move on. You can write to me. My email is on the chat.
Yeah, I didn't see that, but I'll have a look.
Thank you, Helena. Thank you so much. Omar, let's come to you next.
Hi, Andrew. How are you doing? You all right?
Yeah, hello.
Yeah. I'm just wondering what your opinion is on the growth of Machiavellianism in politics over the last 40 to 50 years. What's your opinion on
Machiavellianism. You see this book,
Yeah.
The Political Psyche. It has a chapter all about Machiavelli and about the two sides of Machiavelli, which he called the lion and the fox. And good quality Machiavellianism needs the lion for all the brute force and the fox for thinking. And the difficulty is that most people opt for the lion over the fox. If it's really, I quite like this chapter. I wrote it a long, long time ago. And Machiavelli was also very, very open and honest about bad behavior in politics. I mean, he basically said politics is nearly always about bad behavior. And in modern language, he was saying, get conscious of that. Machiavelli was not telling princes what to do. He was describing and critiquing and psychologizing what they were already doing. Okay, so he was observing politics. He's an observer of politics more than an encouragement for people to be ruthless and so on. But think of a lion.
Yeah.
And think of a fox and hold them together, because that is the essence of Machiavelli's political philosophy, of his political psychology.
Thank you. And with that, I just wanted to add, because you're a Jungian therapist, would you say that the trickster's involved in that?
Yes, read the bloody hell, man. You are really on top of your game. The chapter is absolutely full of trickster stuff. Get it.
I will do,
It's
definitely.
in the political psyche. But it's lovely when somebody who doesn't know something knows it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. We're just in our last couple of minutes. Joe, maybe we could come to you just quickly, if that's all right, just for a really quick question. And yeah,
it is quick. Thank you, Andrew. That was so refreshing, so needed. I wanted to ask you, what positive role do you think social media can play here? Positive.
I have no idea. What do you think?
Well, it can be used patchily, I guess.
I mean, it's a weakness. I don't think much about social media. I have a Twitter account, never use it. I'm not on Facebook. I've got an Instagram account, but never use. I'm just out of that, and that's fine with me. Let other people who know more about it go into those areas. Another area I am incredibly weak on is AI. Now, it doesn't mean these things are considered unimportant from where I sit, but I have a different set of values and interests. At the heart of my politics is inequality and my opposition to inequality in all areas, which is, as I try to explain, getting worse and worse and worse. So everybody has their own bag. We say in Yiddish, everyone has their own shtick. It's the thing they keep on talking about. So I won't talk about social media. I will talk about power and how media has power, but that's not what you're asking about. So I hope this is a non-answer, but I think I'm glad to have the chance to give it because I can share how I'm thinking. I'm 75. I'm never going to be able to write a single interesting thing about social media or AI. I'm not, or computers. I'm not. But gender or violence or privilege, yeah, I can do that. And that's fine with me. I think it's terribly important that there is a pluralistic spirit in this therapy and politics world in which people can disagree, people will have different opinions, people are good. Some people are better at doing something and other people are better at doing another thing. That's the principle of complementarity in physics, and it's true in life as well. But thank you, best I could do.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much, Joe, for that. Thank you. Here we are at the end of our hour together. Andrew, thank you so much for an invigorating presentation and really engaging with us in the Q&A. Just, yes.
Yeah, because there are now hundreds of things on the chat, I'm going to say my email slowly because you can't expect everybody to go find it, especially if you're closing at some point the Zoom. I mean, I may ask you to send me a printout of the chat, which you can do with copy and paste. I've done it, but I can't do it and they can't do it. Andrew at andrewsamuels.net. Andrew at andrewsamuels.net. I promise for 2 weeks I'll reply. After that, forget it.
It's so generous. There's 200 of us here in Zoom, and just it's a very, very generous offer. So, and I can see by the chat there are definitely colleagues who are going to take you up on that offer, Andrew. Wow, this has been a very energetic seminar. Thank you, Andrew, for coming along, presenting the paper, interacting with us as a group. Yeah, a lot to take away and think about, take into our lives, take into our work. Thank you so much.